Goedemiddag en namens Happiness heel hartelijk welkom. Mijn naam is Julika Marijn en ik vroeg me af, zal nou bij deze lezing de zaal juist heel vol zitten of heel erg leeg? Nou, die zit behoorlijk vol. Ik had het misschien ook kunnen weten. We hebben een Amerikaanse bestseller-auteur in ons midden en ze is ook nog actrice. En ze gaat spreken, ja, natuurlijk toch wel over een exciting topic. In ieder geval een onderwerp waar iedereen wel geïnteresseerd in is en waar ook echt iedereen mee te maken heeft. Namelijk seks. Seks op een Happiness Festival? Ja, want volgens Jessica Graham is seks nou juist bij uitstek de ultieme spirituele oefening. Het is tijd om echte aandacht aan elkaar te geven en kwaliteitstijd. En juist in deze roerige tijden van Me Too wil Jessica juist een positieve boodschap uitdragen. Dat seks geweldig kan zijn als je het met een persoon doet die gelijkwaardig aan je is, die gelijkgestemd is. En dat het vooral gaat over contact. Elkaar diep aankijken en vooral in het nu zijn. Ik geef heel graag het woord en graag jullie warme applaus voor Jessica Graham. Welcome.
This is a fancy chair. I feel like I'm in the wicker Game of Thrones. Hello. Thank you so much for being here today. I really appreciate you creating this community here with me and with the entire Happiness Festival. So I'd like to take a few minutes for us to just settle in together and create the space, create the container for this topic, which can be a little confronting. So let's do that. Go ahead and close your eyes if you like. And let's take a few nice, slow, deep breaths together. So we'll inhale together and we'll exhale together. So breathing in and letting it go with a sigh. Good. Let's do that 2 more times. Inhale. 1 more. Biggest yet. Inhale. And noticing already, does the body relax just a bit? Just from deepening the breath. So I want us to take a moment here to let go of how we think we're supposed to feel in this moment. If there's a way we think we should be feeling, let's let that go. And instead, really deeply embrace what we are feeling right now. So checking in and notice, how does your throat feel? How about your chest and the area around your heart? What sensations are present here? And feeling into the stomach, feeling into the guts. What's going on here? Taking a moment to just be exactly where you are. Now I'd like to guide us through a resource practice, and this is something you can come back to again and again through our time together. And all it is drawing your attention to a place in your body that feels good. that feels calm, that feels peaceful, that feels safe. Or maybe it just feels neutral, a place in the body where there's no problem. And I want you to rest your attention here, this place where there is no problem in the body, this place that feels safe. And we'll call this a resource. Good. So as you're ready, go ahead and blink your eyes open. So even though you all came here to talk about sex, that doesn't necessarily mean that your whole body, your whole system is on board. Sex is a complex topic. And so this resource practice is something that you can use to support yourself. So if something I say upsets you or offends you or excites you, maybe you just for a moment draw attention to resource, draw attention to something that feels safe and comfortable in your body, and just hang out there and be with that for a moment. And my hope is that you can take that practice into your life. If it's not something you're already doing, that you can begin to use resource throughout the day. Anytime there's agitation, anytime there's fear, anytime there's insecurity or overwhelm, we can find a safe place inside our bodies. Even if it's just the pinky toe, just a small portion of the body. So, I want you to take a minute and in your mind, say the word sex. Sex. And then just notice what happens. Sex. What happens in your body? Does something tighten up? Does something soften and expand? Is the mind saying, I'm not going to say that in my mind? Is the mind saying, oh, I say sex in my mind all the time, it's no big deal? So just noticing what the system, how the system reacts to this word. It's just one word, but it can bring up so much. And we can start with the mindfulness right there, just with the word. It's wonderful to bring mindfulness, to bring presence, to bring our spiritual practice into sex, but we don't need to go right there immediately. We can start with just seeing how the word affects us and mindfully attending to that reaction. So just noticing. So the topic of sex was always a favorite of mine from the time I was very, very young. Some of that was just the way that I came out. Just born that way. And some of it was learning about sex at a very early age, maybe getting too much information from my hippie parents. And some of it came from trauma. So we are going to talk about that a little bit today, because how can we talk about sex without talking about trauma? We can't. So this combination of experiences created a kid that was really interested in sex. And I was also really interested in spirituality. I was introduced to meditation as a little girl by my mom. And by my dad as well, because he was so in love with nature and art and music and film, and that was its own kind of meditation for him. But I grew up in a home where there was alcoholism and there was mental illness and everything that comes along with that. And probably a large portion of you know exactly what I mean when I say that. Because so many of us are touched by mental illness and by addiction. Even if it was our great-grandparents, it affects us. And so I wanted to get away from who I was as a kid. And so I got very far away from spirituality. I was on my own very young at 14, and most of my time was spent surviving. I didn't stop being interested in sex, though. And by the time I was in my teens, I became the sex coach for all my friends. They would come to me, they would ask me questions like, how do I give a blowjob? Or, I think my girlfriend's pregnant, or I cheated, what should I do? These kinds of things. And I kind of had like office hours. I'd sit and I would give this teenage advice. But my own sex life, as active and fun and as exciting as it was through my teens and into my 20s, there was something missing, and it was presence. I wasn't really fully there. The first time I had sex, I did it because I just felt like it needed to be done. It's like, gotta cross that off the list. I kept my sneakers on the whole time. They were blue Converse All-Stars, turquoise. I remember looking up at the ceiling of the hot rod car and seeing my feet. I also remember that young man, who was a fair bit older than me, actually asked for my consent. And this was a while ago. It was before we really were talking about consent. And while it wasn't necessarily a positive experience, it wasn't negative, and I appreciate the fact that that guy who, I don't know how he knew to do that, but knew to say, are you sure you want to do this? The thing was is that I was high. I had been at a party. And that began the trajectory of my sex life, which involved drugs and alcohol and various ways of checking out. Another way I loved to check out was to date people who had a lot of challenges, people who really liked to drink or really liked to do drugs or really liked to get violent with me. I wanted to distract myself, and so I used things like drugs and alcohol and dysfunctional relationships to distract myself from being present. And so my sex life, again, while it was fun and exciting and adventurous, I was pretty checked out. In my late 20s, at the end of yet another really dysfunctional relationship where I wasn't actually getting my needs met in any way, including sexually, I decided it was time for a change. And I was lucky that I was able to change, because it's hard. It's really hard to change our brains, but it's possible. So I stopped drinking, and I stopped doing drugs, and I spent a year celibate. Besides a few little slip-ups. I made out with someone. At the end of that year, I began a meditation practice in earnest, a daily practice. I learned to deconstruct the experience of self. I learned to observe the emotional experience in my body and the mental experience in my mind until I saw through it, until I no longer identified with this idea of a solid, fixed self. And we all have the capacity to have this sort of awakening. It just takes practice. If you sit and you observe your mind and you observe your emotions long enough, you start to realize, oh, there's more to me than that. And so I practiced this way, and I had a real paradigm shift, and life really opened up in amazing ways. And I had my first semi-functional loving relationship. But I was still a little checked out around sex, because it was what I had practiced all those years. I had practiced this sort of checked out version of sex. And my partners also practiced a checked out version of sex. That's what we did. But this whole meditation thing got me thinking. Came home from a meditation retreat one day, and I said to myself, you know, sunsets are more beautiful. Food tastes more delicious. Massages feel more amazing. It seems like everything is better when you add in meditation and mindfulness. What about sex? It would probably be pretty fucking fantastic if I brought in these principles. I wasn't interested in tantric sex. I'm highly influenced and inspired by it, but I didn't want to drink any Kool-Aid. And while I am interested in the idea of masculine and feminine energy, it seemed a little too limiting for me. What about folks that don't identify with any gender? What about when I'm in my more masculine? And there's room for that in tantric sex, certainly, and there are wonderful teachers who are working with folks in that realm. But I wanted something a little broader and a little more secular. And I couldn't find it. So I started my own exploration. At that time, my partner wasn't interested. I said, let's look into each other's eyes the whole time we're having sex. Hell no, he was not interested. He's like, what do you mean, Jessica? Usually you just put your head under the pillow and squeeze your eyes shut. Why do you want to look into my eyes? Like, well, I want to see what happens. I want to see how my body feels. I want to see how my mind reacts. I want to get mindful about this experience. I want to wake up here too. We think of spiritual awakening as this sort of pure thing. But what about spiritual awakening while you're giving head? What about spiritual awakening during a one-night stand with some really hot person you met at the Happinez Festival? What about a spiritual experience when you're just having a quickie with your partner of 30 years and you just have just a little bit of time? Why can't that also be a spiritual experience? It can be. So I wanted that as well, and I didn't have a partner to practice it with at the time. So I started delving into my own sexuality, on my own. And a big part of that was starting to address my own sexual trauma, starting to heal it, starting to work with therapists and coaches and body workers, and really delving into my spiritual practice. And I got these opportunities that sound crazy when I talk about them, but moments where I got to interact with my 3-year-old, the one who didn't know how to say no to the older neighborhood boys. I got to hold her in my arms and let her tell me everything she needed to tell me. And I got to say, I'm so sorry, and I love you so much, and I'm going to take such good care of you. And that was all as a result to bringing the practice of meditation, of mindfulness, into that part of my life. Not separating it out, because this is spirituality and this is sexuality. No, bringing them together. And it's not just about healing these deep wounds that so many of us have. It's also about having a good time. What else are we here to do, right? Connect with each other and have a good time. And I think when we're truly having a good time, we are practicing kindness. When we're truly having a good time, we are in compassion for ourselves and for others. When we're having a good time, we're in possibility. We're not in this little tiny container that we've created for ourselves because the world is not safe. No, we start to open up to just how safe it is to rest in all that uncertainty. So I went on this adventure on my own. I read erotica and noticed what happened in my body. I started practicing mindful pleasure with myself. Put on some red lipstick. Wore some clothes that made me feel sexy. Just explored, what is this like to bring this new perspective, a perspective of awakening, a perspective of consciousness into this aspect of my life. And what I found is that it worked very quickly, and I started to change and grow. And that relationship ended. And the next one I got in, it was day and night. I'd never had a sexual experience like this before. And I always thought I had a really great sex life. I had no idea. No clue what it could be when you actually feel the sensations. When you're not stuck in your mind and all your insecurities and your fears and your random thoughts about what you need to do later. But instead you're in your body feeling the sensations of sex. I didn't know what it would be like to actually taste and smell and see sex. Without that sticky filter, actually clearly experiencing. So it really blew me away. And I couldn't help but start talking about it and writing about it. Because you know how it is when you first learn something new, you first start meditating or you first go to a 12-step meeting or whatever it is, and you're like, I have to tell everyone. We become a little evangelical. So I was very excited to tell everybody what I was learning. The thing is that people really wanted it. People wanted to talk about it. Because we don't talk about sex. Even in really open places. I feel like, folks here are a lot more open than in the US. But still, it's challenging to talk about this topic. And people are hungry for it. And so it started to feel like, well, this is what I got to do. I got to talk about sex. I'm comfortable doing it, so I need to do it. And that led to writing a book and teaching a lot more and talking a lot more about this topic. I like to lead with vulnerability. I think the more that we do that, the more possible it is for true connection to occur. And so I'll share with you a funny story, which is that the English language version of my book came out. And shortly after, I became very ill. And I was already dealing with some chronic illness and chronic pain, but I became even more sick. And I went from someone who was, let's just say, very sexually active, to someone who's barely having sex at all. And yet I'm going around the world talking about sex and teaching about sex. And I share this because I think it's very important for us all to know that there's no graduation point. You're not going to get it and then you're done. Okay, now I do mindful sex and everything's perfect. No, you're going to keep being human, just like me. And so now I get to learn, what is it like to bring my spiritual practice, to bring mindfulness into illness? What is it like to bring my spiritual practice and meditation into sex when dealing with chronic pain? So many of us deal with pain during sex, and we never even tell our partners. The statistics are very sadly high, and that's for men and women. Because we don't talk about sex. And so we can't even say, ouch, that hurts. Let's try a different position. Now, I know for some of you, you absolutely do that. You know how to advocate for yourself and for your pleasure, and you know how to communicate. But that's not the norm. So for me, it's important to share that part of my story as well, because that's what I'm working with now. And just because I'm sitting up here doesn't mean that I have all the answers for you. The answers are in here. And so you take this idea of mindful sex and bring it into your life in the way that's authentic for you. And then bring it into everything else as well. Bring it into the tragedy, the heartbreak that is non-negotiable as a human. Bring it into the joy and the love that is your birthright as a human. But please, bring it into sex. Bring your practice, bring your mindfulness, bring your meditation into your sexual connection with yourself and with your partners. Because I do believe that as we do this, as we wake up sexually, we heal the world. Think of how much suffering is caused in our world through sex. It's a huge amount. And if each one of us is willing to do our part to awaken ourselves to become conscious around sex, then we start to model that for the world. And that can have beautiful consequences. And in that way, we can all become sexual activists. And that's whether you're polyamorous with 10 partners or monogamous with one, or maybe you're not even interested in sex with other people. You just want to explore it with yourself. There's still room for you to be part of that world-changing movement of awakened sexuality. So, I want to teach you something that you can go home and do. A way that you can bring mindfulness into sex tonight. And it's what I call mindful masturbation. I've been told that I should call it embodied self-pleasure, because that's like, I don't know, more spiritual, sexier, I don't know. So whatever you like to call it. Awakened jerking off. Like, conscious diddling. Whatever you want to call it. I call it mindful masturbation. And I'm going to tell you exactly how to do it. And some of you might already be practicing mindful masturbation, and if so, awesome. For anyone that's already feeling a little uncomfortable, right? Because I'm about to get really specific. Just notice, okay, what's happening in the body? Maybe there's a feeling of wanting to laugh. Maybe there's the feeling of, who is this person? I don't even want to listen to this anymore. I'm out of here. Or maybe the mind is just starting to get staticky, right? So when we are living with the after effects of trauma, we go into fight, flight, freeze. And freeze will just take that mind to a place where it can't comprehend. And so maybe that's happening just a little bit. And if so, just noticing. And going to resource, finding that place in your body that feels safe. Just being willing to do that for yourself, to give yourself that gift of resource. Good. So here's how this exercise works. First off, for mindful masturbation, I suggest that you put aside any toys, any porn, or any fantasy. And I know for some of you that might feel disappointing, but I'm not saying it because there's anything wrong with those things. If that's part of your sexuality, that's wonderful. Just for this exercise, you'll put it aside. You'll create a space for yourself. It could be on the bed or the floor or the couch. Make it cozy, make it comfortable, make it cushioned. Have lubricant if that's something that you use for your self-pleasure practice. And grab your phone and set yourself a timer. A timer for 10 to 15 minutes. Now, of course, you can do it longer or shorter, but 10 to 15 minutes is a good place to start. And I want you to begin by just tuning into what feels good in the body before you even begin to touch yourself. Just notice what feels good in my body right now. And let's all do that together. Just now, just checking in, is there any kind of pleasure in my body right now? Even just a little bit. Now, it's very common when you look for pleasure, you find its opposite. We have a negativity bias as humans. We tend to go towards what doesn't feel good when asked to go towards what does. So it's okay if that resistance comes up. Just see, is there something pleasurable? And we can sensitize ourselves to this a bit. Close your eyes for a moment and bring to mind something that's unconditionally good or positive for you. So for me, I think of puppies and kittens, and I'm just immediately feeling good, right? I'm just thinking of a little puppy. He's so cute. It makes me smile. It makes my body feel warm. Right? So just find something for yourself, something that feels good to think about. And you'll know it's working if you start to smile a bit. And then feel that. What does it feel like in your body? The smile, maybe some warm tingles. Good. So, I don't think about puppies and kittens while I masturbate, by the way, just to be clear. I was just using that as an example of things that make me feel good. I actually find that I think about less and less when I practice self-pleasure because it's not as necessary. Just feeling my body feels good. But fantasy is absolutely allowed in general. Fantasy can be mindful too. But for this exercise of mindful masturbation, you'll put fantasy to the side. It's just about you and your body. And so there you are, you're in your comfy little space you've created. You've set your timer. And you're noticing, is there any pleasure present in my body? Then you're going to begin to explore your body with your hands, but not right to the genitals. In fact, you might not even make it there the first time. I have one client who told me he spent the full 15 minutes just stroking his upper left chest above the nipple. And that's all he did. And he said it was amazing. Did I do it wrong? No, that's it. Did it feel amazing? Did it feel good? Were you present with the experience? Yes? Okay, you did it right. So it might be that your first exploration or second exploration or 10th exploration of mindful masturbation doesn't even involve the genitals. So explore, feel your face, run your fingers along your jawline, touch your lips, stroke your hair. What's it like to tickle your collarbone? Squeeze your arm, stroke your wrist. Start to explore different sensory qualities of self-touch. Find out what feels good, and then focus on that good feeling. The same way you'd focus on your breath in a meditation practice. Same way you'd focus on a candle flame in a meditation practice. You're going to keep coming back to pleasure. That is your object of focus. Exploring your whole body before you even start to touch the genitals. Maybe you're even touching your feet. I shared yesterday that when I was a teenager, a boy I was making out with touched my feet, and I was like, whew. Made me feel so grown up and sensual. So try it out. Touch your own foot. What does that feel like? Tickle behind your knee. And then if and when you're ready to explore the genitals, see if you can bring a completely fresh perspective to it. At this Buddhist retreat that I love, one night before I went off to bed, the nun said, "Go to sleep tonight as if it's the first time, and wake up tomorrow as if it's the first time." And so, touch your genitals as if it's the first time. If there's something that you normally do, if you have your go-to masturbation technique, don't do that. Nothing wrong with it, but for this exercise, try something new. Try something different. Don't worry about orgasm or climax. For this exercise, it really doesn't matter. It's really just about learning to focus on pleasure. Keep coming back to the pleasure. And once the timer has gone off, if you haven't had an orgasm and you want to, great, go for it. Do it however you want to do it. Bring in your porn, bring in your toys, bring in whatever you want, and go for it. But I would invite you to do a little bit of writing first. It's part of the exercise. Do just a little bit of stream of consciousness writing about what came up, how you felt. Maybe some emotions came up. Maybe some anger, maybe some joy. Maybe you just laughed the whole time. Write about it a little bit. Explore it. And so it's as simple as that, to start bringing mindfulness into your sex life. Now, one of the things that can happen, as I said, is some emotions can come up. And so for some of you, your mindful masturbation practice might start with just holding yourself. It might be just this. I love you, sweetheart. You're enough. You deserve kindness. You're safe. That might be your mindful masturbation practice for a little while. Because self-love comes first. That's the first ingredient for a good sex life, including with yourself. So as you learn what feels good and how to focus on what feels good, you can start to bring it into sex with partners. But I will tell you, as you wake up to your body and to pleasure, you're going to also realize what doesn't feel good. And you might not be able to do the same old, same old. If there's this thing you've been doing for a couple years with your partner and it kind of works for both of you, but not really, you're probably not going to want to keep doing it once you bring mindfulness into sex. If any of you have had the experience of getting more mindful about food and where your food comes from, it's really hard to go back to McDonald's after that, right? Same thing here. As you start to wake up sexually, you don't want to go back to having checked out unconscious sex. It's junk food. That doesn't mean you can't have wild, kinky, dirty sex. It doesn't mean you can't have that one-night stand if you want to. But you're going to want to bring in the same amount of awareness and consciousness as you would in a mindful masturbation practice. It's a little different with another person there, but this attention to pleasure is really, really important. And being able to communicate. Yes, that feels good. Not so much that. Yes, I want to do this. I don't want to do that. So this mindfulness comes into the way that we communicate about sex. It makes it more possible for us to ask for what we want and be clear about what we don't want. How's everyone doing? Yeah. So, this is really just the bare minimum. This is just a beginning invitation. The door opening a crack. And it's up to you to open that door all the way and to walk right through. And to be willing to have your own sexual awakening. And that might include a lot of healing work. Might include getting a new relationship. It might include deepening intimacy in your current relationship. It definitely will include that. So what I'd like to do now is I'd like to take a little bit of time to open it up for questions. And I do this because it's really important that we learn how to talk about sex. And so if there are a few brave folks out there who want to bring up a question, a reflection, let's do that. And know that by using your voice in this space, you're being of service to everyone here, including me. And we have a microphone coming around.
Hi, thank you so much for this presentation. I'm wondering if you could speak about pelvic exercises and ejaculation.
What specifically are you interested in?
Well, I'm personally interested in the question of ejaculation as a waste of energy. And I hear different thoughts on that, and it's hard for me to settle. And
So when you're working on, let's say, a creative project, and you're ejaculating a lot, does it seem like you have less energy for the creative project? Yeah. Well, that is your answer then, for you, personally, right? So we're all individuals. There's not one size fits all. It's all about what is working for you. So yes, in general, men report that it can decrease energy that could go towards things like a creative project. And so that's something to explore. It's something to play around with, right? That doesn't mean that sexual pleasure couldn't be included, right? There could be, obviously, sex and even orgasm without ejaculation. That's something that can be practiced and learned like any other skill, like learning the piano. But at the end of the day, nobody, and I don't care how advanced someone is, can tell you exactly what's right for you. So I would explore and see what happens. I think that exploration and open-mindedness is key. So explore. Find out for yourself. Yeah. What else? Yeah. How much time do we have?
Thank you very much for the wonderful presentation. And I have a question about getting an orgasm. What if that is very hard or doesn't, how do I say it? If you don't get an orgasm?
So you don't get an orgasm when you're with yourself and with partners, or just with partners? Both.
Both.
Mm-hmm. So the first thing I would say is to start to tune into pleasure instead of focusing on orgasm. Just start to learn pleasure. That's the beginning step. Because an orgasmic state is possible even without climax. And so to start to find out what feels good for you and what increases pleasure for you. And then also know that there are so many different ways that orgasm, climax can happen. And the way that you think it's supposed to be, or the idea that you might have based on a movie or a book or what a friend said, could be very different from what it is for you. The other piece of this is that many folks of all genders deal with orgasm anxiety. The mind gets very loud. It's not going to happen. Their mouth is probably tired. My arm is tired, right? Like, I'm never going to have the orgasm, and the mind is just going, going, going. Along with, when we're with a partner, there can be a lot of insecure thoughts about our body, thoughts about how we smell or taste, thoughts about, maybe they don't really want to be doing it, right? And so I just call this orgasm anxiety. And one of the ways to work with orgasm anxiety is to focus on pleasure, just like we did today. Just put your attention on the body. Don't try to quiet the mind. The mind creates thoughts just like the liver does what it does or the stomach does what it does. So we're not going to try to turn that off. Instead, bringing attention back to the body again and again and again. The more embodied you are, the less in your mind about what is or is not happening, the more likely you're going to have a more expansive, pleasurable experience. But also, it's really important to know that there's nothing wrong with you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I really mean that.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much. We have time for one more question.
Hi there. I'm a mom, as I guess many of us are. And as my kids grow older, I feel like sex gets pushed to the outer limits of my day. And it gets less and less spontaneous and more planned. And whenever my husband's home, usually the kids are home, and they're getting more conscious of what we're doing or where we are, or that we're not in the room. So I want to hear your insights on being creative with that.
Yes. Well, the first thing I'll say is that your sexuality is a relationship. So it's a relationship with yourself as well as with your partner. And so the first thing to do is to make sure that you're giving some attention to your sexuality every day. So you're checking in with sexual experience every day. That doesn't necessarily mean you're having sex every day, but you're paying attention to that part of yourself. Something I've been giving to a lot of my clients lately is just to gently cup the vulva and say hello. Hey, sexy. So to stay in touch with that aspect of you and to feed that aspect of you, the music you're listening to, the way you're eating your food, the clothing you're wearing, the way the bed is made, all of these things can affect a sort of sensual, sexual part of oneself. And so you start with that. You're putting money in your sexuality piggy bank every day, just for you. Then, with your partner, it's about doing the same thing. And so it might be a sexy text in the middle of the afternoon. Those pants looked good on you today, babe. It might be a longer kiss goodbye instead of that obligatory peck that we graduate to later in relationships, right? Right? Instead, maybe it just lingers, even for a few seconds. Maybe there's a little tongue involved. Maybe instead of a pat on the butt, it's a stroke on the lower back, right? We start to bring sensuality and sexuality into all of our micro interactions. That starts to feed the sexual energy between us. We talk about sex more. Whether it's bringing up memories of experiences we had in the past, or whether it's, so I saw this movie the other day, and there was a sex scene, and it got me thinking, I want to try this thing sometime. We don't have to do it right now, but I'm interested, right? To just start having that conversation on a more regular basis. So sex is great, but there's all of these other pieces that go along with it that you do have time for. Everyone does. So that's what I would begin with. Then I would suggest that you make friends with the scheduling of sex. I know it can feel like, oh, if I'm scheduling sex, it's not spontaneous, it's not fun, it's not as good that way. But you know what? We have full lives. I don't even have kids. I have a full life, though. I have to schedule sex, and not always. There's a little spontaneity because I don't have the kids, but still, right? Like, it's okay. That doesn't mean you failed in some way. Right? The relationship is not getting it wrong just because you have to schedule your Friday night sex. But I would do that. No matter what, I would find a time at least once a week, not necessarily to have sex, but to connect sexually. So maybe it's having sex, maybe it's mutual masturbation, maybe, he's just going down on you, maybe you're just making out like teenagers, but you're finding that time to connect. But I think mainly it really is about infusing the relationship with sexuality and letting it be new. Not trying to recreate what you had before kids or when the relationship first started and it was all hot and heavy with the chemicals, but instead let it be something new, right? As I shared in dealing with chronic pain and chronic illness, I have to let my sexuality become something new. I can't do the things I used to do. And so one way of looking at that is, oh, man, my sex life is ruined. And another way of looking at it is, whoa, I get to enter this whole new paradigm. I don't even know what's going to happen, right? And so to bring that sense of discovery and possibility in, let it be something new. A couples therapist that a partner and I once had, he was much older, I think he's maybe in his 70s, maybe even 80s, and he was a serious meditator and a very awake dude. And he said to us, when you get older, sex gets really weird. So let it get weird. Let it get weird. Yeah. Well, this time flew by. I wish we had more. I so appreciate you being here with me, being willing to take part in this topic. I'd like to take a moment to seal off our time together before we leave. So just go ahead and close your eyes for just a moment. We'll just be here for a moment. I want you to tune into something that feels good, pleasurable, safe, calm, something where there's no problem in your body. And I just want to tell you that you are lovable and deserving of love just the way you are in this moment. And if you're experiencing suffering in the realm of sexuality, know that it can get better. Healing is possible for you. pleasure is possible for you. And deeper self-love is possible for you. I see you and I love you, and I'm so grateful that you are here today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jessica, for your story and for your advices.